With pleasure.
That's okay. No, he can tell us how much he likes Canada because
I love Canada. And I really appreciate that we have such relations with you, Justin.
Canada has been one of the strongest countries in support of Ukraine from the very beginning.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government appears to be distracted, ignoring the several challenges Canadians battle with. One of the most glaring examples of this misplaced priority is Trudeau's unwavering financial and political support for Ukraine.
What role will Canada play in that coalition?
Canada has been one of the strongest countries in support of Ukraine from the very beginning. For over 10 years now, we've been training Ukrainian defense forces. We're up to close to 40,000 Ukrainian troops that we have trained over the years. We're continuing to play a significant role in training, as is the UK, who is our primary partner in that. We've also invested close to $20 billion in supports for Ukraine, military, economic, and other. And we're going to continue to be there to support Ukraine as necessary, with whatever it takes for as long as it takes, because Ukraine is not just defending its own territory, it's defending the very principles and values that underpin all of our democracies. So as we look at what's going to be necessary in the coming years, I can assure you that Canada and Canadians will be there.
Since the Russian invasion in 2022, Canada has funneled nearly $20 billion into Ukraine, covering everything from military aid to economic assistance. While Canada's commitment to humanitarian support is commendable, this level of financial backing raises serious concerns, especially when the same government fails to address the growing crisis at home.
Mr. Whitman, CTV News. In those roles, Prime Minister Stormont mentioned the coalition of the willing. What role will Canada play in that coalition?
Canada has been one of the strongest countries in support of Ukraine from the very beginning. For over 10 years now, we've been training Ukrainian defense forces. We're up to close to 40,000 Ukrainian troops that we have trained over the years. We're continuing to play a significant role in training, as is the UK, who is our primary partner in that. We've also invested close to $20 billion in supports for Ukraine, military, economic, and other. And we're going to continue to be there to support Ukraine as necessary, with whatever it takes for as long as it takes, because Ukraine is not just defending its own territory, it's defending the very principles and values that underpin all of our democracies. So as we look at what's going to be necessary in the coming years, I can assure you that Canada and Canadians will be there.
Despite warnings from financial experts, policymakers, and even government officials that excessive foreign spending and mass immigration are straining Canada's economy, Trudeau's administration remains steadfast in its approach, seemingly blind to the consequences. As we move forward, I'd like to ask you a quick favor to subscribe and like this video. It takes just a second and helps us so much. Despite Canada's deep financial and political investment in Ukraine, recent developments suggest this support is not reciprocated. Ukraine is now pressuring Canada to offer automatic visa renewals and even permanent residency to nearly 300,000 Ukrainians who arrived under the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel Program. While Canada welcomed these individuals under the premise of temporary shelter, Ukraine is now pushing for a more permanent arrangement, with reports indicating that over 90% of them have expressed a desire to remain in the country permanently, one that could have lasting consequences on Canada's already overwhelmed immigration system, housing market, and social services. Trudeau's government, instead of resisting these demands, is openly considering them, even though internal reports acknowledge the risks. This situation raises a troubling question. After everything Canada has done to support Ukraine, is the country now taking advantage of Trudeau's open-handed generosity? Canada is facing an economic and social crisis unlike anything seen in recent history. Inflation has driven the cost of everyday necessities to unbearable levels, forcing many Canadians to stretch their budgets beyond what is sustainable. Grocery bills have skyrocketed, making it difficult for families to put food on the table. Rent and mortgage payments have surged to all-time highs, leaving countless individuals either struggling to keep up with their housing costs or being pushed out of the market entirely. The once stable middle class is shrinking as more people find themselves living paycheck to paycheck, unable to keep up with the relentless financial pressures. Meanwhile, young Canadians who had once aspired to homeownership now see it as an unattainable dream, locked out of the housing market due to skyrocketing prices and an ever-widening affordability gap. Instead of investing in solutions to bring down the cost of living, build affordable housing, or improve healthcare services, Trudeau continues to prioritize foreign commitments. Billions of taxpayer dollars are being funneled into international projects while domestic programs remain underfunded and ineffective. Despite Canada's growing economic crisis, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has committed an astonishing $19.5 billion in aid to Ukraine, a figure that far exceeds what his government has allocated to address urgent domestic issues such as healthcare, housing, and poverty. Of this $19.5 billion, a significant portion, $4.5 billion has been allocated directly to military support. This includes tanks, anti-tank weapons, artillery, and extensive training for Ukrainian troops under Operation Unifier, which has now been extended until 2026. Additionally, the government recently pledged another $650 million to provide Ukraine with 50 armored vehicles, including medical evacuation vehicles, which are being produced in London, Ontario. The spending does not stop there. Trudeau's government has also allocated $389 million to help Ukraine integrate and operate F-16 fighter jets, further entrenching Canada in the war effort. This contribution comes at a time when many Canadians are questioning what they are receiving in return for these massive financial commitments. A closer look at where taxpayer money is going reveals an unsettling pattern. For example, $333 million has been allocated to ACN projects, an expense that does little to address Canada's pressing infrastructure concerns. Meanwhile, $750 million has been earmarked for Asian infrastructure investments, funding that could have been used to improve public transit, roads, and bridges here at home. Similarly, the government has committed $80 million to the World Bank for pandemic prevention, despite Canada's healthcare system being in crisis, with emergency rooms at capacity and wait times at an all-time high. Perhaps the most baffling expenditure is the $1 billion Trudeau has promised to foreign nations, including Indonesia, Vietnam, and India, to incentivize them to reduce coal usage. There is no guarantee these countries will follow through on their commitments. Yet the Canadian government is willing to hand over $1 billion while failing to provide its citizens with relief from rising energy costs and inflation. Since 2015, Trudeau's administration has spent an eye-watering $100 billion on climate initiatives, yet Canada has failed to meet a single emissions target. And now, the government is committing an additional $5.3 billion over the next 5 years to more global climate projects, even as Canadians struggle with soaring gas and grocery prices.
If we don't do enough, Canadians will continue to endure the hardship of high inflation.
Well, that's the Governor of the Bank of Canada laying out the case for raising interest rates now and then again in the months to come, something that's already bringing a lot of hardship to Canadians.
Despite repeated warnings from economists and financial analysts about the impact of unchecked spending on inflation and the cost of living, Trudeau continues to double down on his financial support for Ukraine. He has assured that Canada's support will be unequivocal and always will be, signaling that there is no end in sight to the billions being allocated abroad. While millions of Canadians struggle to afford necessities, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau continues to live a life of luxury at the taxpayer's expense. His frequent international trips, often accompanied by an entourage of officials, cost millions in travel, security, and high-end accommodations. Instead of setting an example of financial responsibility during an economic crisis, Trudeau spares no expense concerning his comfort. Lavish hotel stays, expensive private flights, and extravagant diplomatic gatherings have become the norm for his administration, all while Canadians are being told to tighten their belts and endure economic hardship. The path forward is clear. Canada must shift its focus from global expenditures to domestic recovery. Prioritizing Canadian citizens is not an act of isolationism. It is a necessity for national stability. What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.